There's nothing better than seeing the Republicans melt like snowflakes because they lost. Um, but after the Republicans lost the Senate, the House, and the presidency, they're trying to make it harder for people to vote because they can't handle the fact that they fucking lost. In Georgia, Arizona, and other states that were won by President Biden, some leading Republicans stood up in November to make what in any other year would be an unremarkable statement: the race is over and we lost fair and square. But that was then, and this is now. Now in state houses nationwide, Republicans who echoed the former squatter Donald Trump's baseless claims of rampant fraud are proposing to make it harder to vote next time. Basically, they're trying to convince the very voters who will leave them that the elections can be trusted again, and even some colleagues who defended the legitimacy of the November vote are joining in. According to the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, the state legislators have filed 106 bills to tighten the election rules, generally making it harder to cast a ballot, triple the number at this time last year. In short, Republicans who for more than a decade have used widely inflated allegations of voter fraud to justify making it harder to vote, are now doing so again, but this time they're seizing on Trump's thoroughly debunked charges of a stolen election to push back at Democratic-leaning voters who flocked to the mail-in ballots this year. For last basically last year in Georgia, where the state House of Representatives have set up a special committee on election integrity, legislators are pushing to roll back the no excuse absentee voting. The Republicans in Pennsylvania plan 14 hearings to revisit complaints that they raised last year about the election and to propose limitations on the voting. Arizona Republicans have subpoenaed November's ballots and vote tabulation equipment in Maricopa County, but a Democratic stronghold that includes Phoenix legislators are taking aim at an election system in which 4 and 5 ballots are mailed or even delivered to drop boxes. Those and other proposals underscore the continuing power of Trump's campaign to delegitimize the November election, even as some of his administration's top election experts call the vote the most secure in history, which it was, and they reflect the long-standing Republican efforts to push back against efforts to expand the ability to vote. Democrats have their own agenda: 406 bills in 35 states, according to the Brennan Center, that run the gamut from giving former felons the vote to automatically registering visitors to the motor vehicle bureaus and other state offices. And Democrats in the Senate will soon unveil a large proposal to undergird much of the election process with what they call pro-democracy reforms, with lowering barriers to voting as the centerpiece, and near identical legislation has been filed in the House. There's going to be a rush in the next year to legislate certain types of certain election reforms," said Nate Persily, who is a Stanford University law professor and co-director of the Stanford MIT Healthy Elections Project. The jury is still out there on whether the lesson from this election will be that we need to make voting as convenient as possible, or whether there will be a serious retrenchment that makes voting less accessible. But in truth, who controls a given legislator will largely decide what chances a bill has. In the 23 states that are wholly run by Republicans, Democratic bills expanding what they call the ballot access are largely dead on arrival. The same is true of Republican proposals to restrict ballot access in the 15 states that are completely controlled by Democrats. But in some states where their legislators control and interests align, the changes could be consequential. In Arizona, where Democrats captured a second Senate seat and Biden eked out a 10,500 vote victory, lawmakers lawmakers are taking aim at an election system in which absentee ballots have long been dominant. One bill would repeal the state's no excuse absentee ballot law. Others would pare back the automatic mail-ins of absentee ballots to the 3.2 million voters who have signed up for the service. One ardent advocate of the stolen election conspiracy theory, the state representative Kevin Payne of Maricopa County, would require that signatures on all mail ballots be notarized, creating an impossibly high bar for most voters. Yet another bill, paradoxically, would require early ballots that are mailed to voters to be delivered by hand. In Georgia, where Biden won by at least 12,000 votes, or actually a little over 11,000, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and Governor Brian Kemp, who are both Republicans, have repeatedly defended the election results, and the two are nevertheless supporting stricter voting requirements. A proposal by Republicans in the state Senate to eliminate the no-excuse absentee ballots, a quarter of the 5 million vote cast in November, has drawn opposition even before it has been filed, but Republicans broadly support a bill to require submitting a photocopied identification card, such as a driver's license, with both applications for absentee ballots and the ballots themselves. But Raffensperger has said he supports that measure and another to make it easier to challenge a voter's legitimacy at the polls. Brian Robinson, a Republican political consultant in Atlanta, said that the overall purpose of these reforms is to restore faith in our election systems. That's not to say that it was a giant failure, but that's to say that faith has been diminished. He allowed that Trump's false charges of fraud drives a lot of the loss of faith among Republicans, but he also took aim at Democrats, noting that the Democrat who lost the 2018 governor's race, Stacey Abrams, had refused to concede, saying that voter suppression had caused an erosion of our democracy. But both sides have dipped their toes in those waters. But it is clear that Republicans are now dipping much more than their toes. Democrats and some voting rights advocates say that the Republicans' agenda on voting is less about lost trust than lost elections. A Republican election official in suburban Atlanta said as much this month, arguing for tougher voting laws that reduce turnout after Democratic candidates won both of the state Senate runoffs this year. And they don't have to change all of them, said Alice Olenek, who leads the Gwinnett County Board of Registration and Elections, but they have got to change the major parts of them, so that we at least have a shot at winning. Not anymore. Mark Elias, who's a Democratic lawyer who led the legal battles against restrictive voting rules last year, said that the reason for the state's voting law crackdown was transparent. But these elections, it says they withstood the scrutiny of two recounts, and audit and a whole lot of attention in the political arena and the courts. He said that the only reason they're doing this is to make voting harder because they didn't like the results, and that's a fucking pathetic, shameful result. Indeed, a handful of bills seem to make no bones about their partisan goals. One Arizona proposal would give the legislator the power to decide on presidential elections by overriding the Secretary of State's certification of the electoral results. But bills in Arizona, Mississippi, and Wisconsin would end the practice of awarding all electoral votes to the presidential candidate who wins the statewide vote. Instead, they would be allotted according to votes in congressional districts, which in Republican states are generally gerrymandered to favor Republicans. In Arizona, the legislature also would choose two electors, but in the last election, the moves would have reduced Biden's electoral vote today by 11 votes. But Nebraska, on the other hand, would do the reverse with a similar partisan outcome. The state now awards presidential electors by congressional district, but legislation would move the state to the winner-take-all system. One of Nebraska's 3 House districts voted for Biden in November. But even Republicans in states where the November election was not close are proposing to tighten the voting laws. In Texas, a state with perhaps the nation's strictest voting rules and one of the lowest levels of turnout, the state party has declared election integrity. The top legislative priority among other proposals, legislators want to cut the time allotted for early voting and limit outsiders' ability to help voters fill out ballots and require new voters to prove that they are citizens. But Republicans who control the Pennsylvania legislature have mounted one of the most aggressive campaigns, even though any laws that they enact probably would have to weather a veto by the state's Democratic governor. A handful of Republican state lawmakers want to abolish the no-excuse absentee voting, only 15 months after the legislature approved it in an election law package that was backed by all but 2 of its 134 Republican members who casted the vote. The main supporter of the bill, which was the state senator Doug Mastriano, has claimed that Biden's victory in the state is illegitimate, which it's not, and spent thousands of dollars to bust protesters in the January 6th demonstration that ended in the assault on the Capitol, which incited this riot. Rolling back the law appears to be a long shot, but there seems to be strong Republican support for other measures, including eliminating drop boxes or absentee ballots, and discarding mail-in ballots with technical errors and ending a grace period for receiving ballots that were mailed by Election Day. The state representative Seth Grove, the Republican chair of the committee holding 14 hearings into election practices, said that at the initial gathering on January 21st. That he was not interested in dwelling on the 2020 election. We want a better process going forward, and we're committed to that. But at that particular hearing, legislators had grilled the Secretary of State, Kathy Bachvar, who's a Democrat, for a few hours on her emailed guidance to the county election officials before the November 3rd election. In an interview, Bakvar said that the purpose of the hearings was to further undermine voters' confidence in democracy and to lay the groundwork for disenfranchisement. We are at a fucking watershed, and we have a choice to make right now. Acknowledge the fucking truth. Have public, vocal, strong support for the strength and resilience of our democracy, or we can continue to perpetuate the lies. In Washington, a Democratic agenda can be seen in the last version of a far-ranging election and voting bill that passed the House last year but died in the Republican-controlled Senate. But this time, the Democrat-controlled Senate will follow its own version, with the committee hearings expected to come up in February. Its voting provisions include allowing automatic and same-day voter registration, 15 days of early voting, and no excuse voting by mail and online voter registration, as well as the restoration of voting rights and nationwide to felons who complete their sentences. In one fell swoop, it would set minimum standards for American federal elections that would erase a lot of procedural barriers to casting a ballot. But it would also require the states to appoint independent and nonpartisan commissions to draw political boundaries, eliminating the profusion of gerrymanders that the Supreme Court said in 2019 were beyond its authority to control. But few would expect a much chance of a passage in a deeply divided Senate. But the Democratic leaders in both houses have made it the first bill of the new congressional session, a statement that, symbolically at least, is the first priority of the new Democratic majority. Whether any of it goes beyond symbolism remains to be seen.